are back, and we are black here on WLTH 1370 AM. That is 92.7 in the FM dial. Yes, it is 7:37 in the PM here on January the 30th, 2026. And we are back here on Straight Out of the Cannon with me, Scott Cannon. I talked about earlier recently about a writer who passed away recently, really a philosopher, a political scientist, you know, a pioneering voice in 21st century political thought, named Michael Parenti. Now, I'm sure most of you have not heard of Michael Parenti, but he was a political scientist for left-wing politics, who was very influential to many people on the left. Definitely kept out of much of mainstream media because, as you just heard from Conspiracy Theory Rock, his theories were a threat, an actual threat to the status quo that we were living in. And I just really wanted to really show you, or at least play for you, why he was such an important voice, an anti-imperialist voice, a leftist voice for so many. You know, he wrote books, Democracy for the Few, Inventing Reality, Dirty Truths, Black Shirts and Reds, To Kill a Nation, and Super Patriotism. You know, the funny thing is that, you know, he was such a funny guy. He was very charismatic. And you can really only attribute the fact that he was never a mainstream political figure in our country to the fact that his leftist politics were too illuminating to working class and poor people. He was too much of a threat to the status quo. He was a professor. He believed in equipping people to understand and challenge the social, political, and economic forces that shape their lives. He never chased the elite circles. We've seen recently Noam Chomsky, who's probably the most famous left-wing political theorist in recent years. He's in the Epstein files. You know, he's hanging out with Jeffrey Epstein and Steve Bannon. And this was the guy that the sort of much of the mainstream was sort of steered towards, you know, somebody who really, though I do think Chomsky has been good as a gateway drug. It's sort of a gateway to left-wing politics, a gateway to anti-imperialist politics. Parenti was the real deal. You know, he didn't hang out with Jeffrey Epstein and Steve Bannon. He preferred to speak directly to workplaces, union halls, community gatherings, and classrooms. And so really, I just wanted to play some of the things that made Parenti so just, you know, such a brilliant political theorist. I always love this clip where he talks about the third world. How there's a narrative about how poor countries are, poor African countries are, poor Latin American countries are. Michael Parenti was somebody who did not buy that illusion.
The third world is not poor. You don't go to poor countries to make money. There are very few poor countries in this world. Most countries are rich. The Philippines are rich. Brazil is rich. Mexico is rich. Chile is rich. Only the people are poor. But there's billions to be made there, to be carved out and to be taken. There's been billions for 400 years. The capitalist European and North American powers have carved out and taken the timber, the flax, the hemp, the cocoa, the rum, the tin, the copper, the iron, the rubber, the bauxite, the slaves, and the cheap labor. They have taken out of these countries. These countries are not underdeveloped, they're overexploited.
Yes. You know, I mean, if you listen to this show, I talk about this all the time, especially when I talk about African countries. It's one of the reasons why I'm such a supporter of Ibrahim Traore of Burkina Faso, Abdulrahman Chiani, and Assimi Goita, all these new African leaders taking power in West Africa because they recognize that Africa is not poor. Africa is the richest continent on the planet. The Democratic Republic of Congo, where we just talked about the genocide and the war happening there, the civil war happening there, they have $30 trillion. $30 trillion of natural resources just in the Democratic Republic of Congo. So now, do you see why they had to kill Patrice Lumumba and replace him with a Western puppet named Mobutu, who would allow Western elites to have access to those resources? This is why we had to overthrow Mossadegh in Iran and put the Shah in power, because he was going to nationalize the oil that the United States and Great Britain wanted. These countries are not poor. So many Americans really go around their whole lives thinking that South America is poor, Latin America is poor, Africa is poor, the Middle East is poor, and the United States actually takes mercy on these countries. And we send aid. We send so much aid. We're so giving and generous. No, we steal these people's resources. We overthrow their governments, decapitate their leadership, often assassinate their leaders, and all at the service of our multinational corporations to take control of their resources. And so, you know, Michael Parenti put it in a much better way than I ever could in 1,000 lifetimes. Also loved his thoughts on communism and why they work so hard to fearmonger about communism and socialism in the mainstream of American politics.
Communism, ladies and gentlemen, I say it without flinching, communism in Eastern Europe, Russia, China, Mongolia, North Korea, and Cuba brought land reform and human services, a dramatic bettering of the living conditions of hundreds of millions of people on a scale never before or never since witnessed in human history. Communism transformed desperately poor countries into societies in which everyone had adequate food, shelter, medical care, and education. To say that socialism doesn't work is to overlook the fact that it did work, and it worked for hundreds of millions of people. But what about the democratic rights that they lost? We hear U.S. leaders talking about restoring democracy to the communist countries. But these countries, with the exception of Czechoslovakia, were not democracies before communism. Russia was a czarist autocracy. Poland was a right-wing fascist dictatorship under Pilsudski with concentration camps of its own. Albania was an Italian fascist protectorate as early as 1927. Cuba was a U.S.-sponsored dictatorship under that butcher Batista. Lithuania, Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria were outright fascist regimes, openly allied with Nazi Germany in World War II. So what democracy are we talking about restoring? The socialist countries did not take away any rights that didn't exist there in the first place.
So that's him talking about communism and how much of pushing back against much of the propaganda that we get against communism and socialism in the Western, particularly American media. Now, I don't consider myself a communist or a socialist or whatever, but I do know that whenever the elites, who are the same people who will shoot you in the face for protesting in Minnesota, who enslaved people in this country for hundreds of years, massacred and dominated and stole the land of native indigenous people who are living here in this country, once they start talking about human rights, you know they're full of crap. Since when do they care about the human rights of people living under communism or socialism. They don't care about human rights of people in Minnesota. So what is their big fear with communism? Well, I'm reading a great book as we speak called Organized Labor and the Black Worker. And it actually goes in depth to how the very first groups of people to fight for black labor rights in America were the communists. Back in the 1920s and the 1930s, the first people to support labor rights were the communists. The people who fought labor unions for black inclusion in the 1920s, the 1930s, the 1940s, the socialists, the communists. Those are the people. There used to be a very healthy, robust socialist communist movement here in the United States at the beginning of the 20th century. It was killed by the Cold War. After we decided Russia was our enemy, after we used them to defeat the Nazis. And yes, they did. 85% of Nazi casualties were killed by the Red Army, the Soviet Union Red Army. And so, again, I don't tell people that they have to convert to any ideology, but it is important to understand why your enemy is so spooked by this. And it sure as hell ain't because, they care so much about democracy or they care so much about human rights. The last people who care about human rights are the capitalists who run this country. They would still have child labor. Hell, they're breaking down child labor laws in the state of Indiana that we currently live in. They are currently rolling back child labor laws because they want 14-year-olds working in factories again. They had to be fought tooth and nail, mostly by communists, by socialists, by leftist radicals, for a 40-hour work week, for an 8-hour work day, for a 5-day work week. So they can spare me with this whole we care so much about human rights in their propaganda. It's complete nonsense. And lastly, I want to play this clip of the great Michael Parenti talking about the CIA and why they committed so many covert military interventions post-World War II.
How else do you explain U.S. interventionism throughout the world? What are the alternative explanations? That the United States has gone in to defend democracy? Well, that can't be because we supported dictatorships in most of these countries. We supported a fascist Somoza in Nicaragua, a fascist Batista in Cuba. Again and again, country after country, we didn't support democracy, we support fascism. And in fact, we've overthrown democracies. We overthrew democracy in Guatemala when Arbenz came into power. We overthrew democracy in Brazil when Goulart came into power. We overthrew democracy in Chile when Allende came into power. We overthrew maybe not democracy, but a populist government leader, Mossadegh in Iran and Sukarno in Indonesia, who had popular democratic support. In each case, in each one of those countries, different leaders, different countries, different histories, different languages, different cultures, but they all had one thing in common. They were beginning to use the political system to tamper with and change the economic and class structure. What Allende was doing in Chile, very democratically, was redistributing some of the gross national income from those who made money from dividends and interest and commissions and rents to those who made money from wages and salaries. Unemployment went down in Chile. Inflation was going down. The rate of inflation was going down. Buying power was increasing for the ordinary people. Popular consumption was increasing. The level of living was bettering in a modest way for the people. Every child in Chile was getting a half a liter of milk under the Allende regime. And when the fascist Pinochet came in, that was one of the first programs he abolished. And in Guatemala, in Arbenz, when he came into office, he legalized all opposition parties. He legalized all opposition all trade unions, all opposition newspapers, all student organizations, which were very political in Guatemala at the time. And then he began to expropriate the unused land from the United Fruit Company. And that's when the CIA went in with a mercenary army, trained by and equipped and financed by the CIA and overthrew him. It wasn't that he threatened democracy, it's that he was using democracy, he was using political democracy to effectuate an economic democracy. And that economic democracy is the thing that privileged classes have hated all their lives. If you go back to ancient Greece, if you look at our founding fathers in the debates at the Constitutional Convention, they talk about the leveling impulse, the common people wanting a bigger share of what we have. And they don't want to give up what they have. They don't want to give it up. They'll fight and kill to keep it. No more than you want to give up your little car or your house or whatever little you got. You don't want to give it up. Imagine if you didn't just own a little car. Imagine if you owned the world. Imagine if you owned everything there was to own. Imagine if you lived like a king. Imagine if you lived in a way that the whole society was there for your service, in a sense. To give that up is the worst tyranny of life. And much of what is called freedom has that class anchorage in it.
Yes. And so again, the late great Michael Parenti talking about why the CIA is used and why the U.S. government is so intent on overthrowing so many actual democratic governments around the world. Again, these people don't care about democracy. They don't care about it here. They don't care about it here. So rest in peace to the late, great Mr. Michael Parenti. I suggest everybody Google him. Michael Parenti, one of the great political scientists of our time, of all time. Definitely a great man. He will be missed. His son, Christian Parenti, is great as well. You can look up all over YouTube. There's a lot of different speeches from him and his son, different appearances, podcast appearances from Christian Parenti. He is continuing the work on. Before I get out of here, I got to take these last two calls. Hello, caller. What's up?
Hey, Scott, what's happening, baby boy?
All right,
we saw you the other day, man. Somebody said I look like Dr. Dre. How's that catfish going for you?
It's all good, brother.
Listen, this is what I want to say right quick. Oprah Winfrey, she went to Milwaukee. Now, she might have been born in Mississippi, and she might experience at our house a little while. Now, you say Kanye West got bipolar. I know plenty of bipolar people. They don't act like that. Don't you remember Juice when they told with Tupac, when they were calling Tupac Daddy nuts? Don't you remember that? Kanye got a 12-year-old daughter that's going to be very impressionable, and that's why he turned it. Listen, I'm going to tell you what, a leopard don't change his spots, okay? Just the way you treat your guests. Hey, Scott, I appreciate you, man.
It's all good, brother. Thank you for your time.
All right.
It's all good. Well, folks, you hear the music.